So last month I participated on a Mad in America panel on different ways to resolve protracted withdrawal syndrome from psychiatric drugs. The panel was hosted by Robert Whitaker and featured 3 panelists. 2 of them, Ben and Kay, shared their stories using brain retraining, and I shared my story using a mind-body approach from John Sarno and Howard Schubiner to resolve both protracted withdrawal and chronic pain. So you can check that out if you want. It's linked below. Now, I very reluctantly joined this panel. I'm very introverted and reticent to share my story, which suggests that based on my own experience and some others I've been in touch with as well, that protracted withdrawal sensations are not necessarily an ongoing drug injury requiring time to heal, but a learned brain phenomenon that can be unlearned through specific approaches. This idea kind of goes against the grain, and it's commonly misunderstood by people who haven't looked at Sarno's or Schubiner's work. I was certainly the same way as well. I didn't take Sarno's ideas seriously for years, but there's now a lot of research supporting his work. And here's a great introductory video called Breakthrough with Healing Chronic Pain with Howard Schubiner. This presentation opened my mind to the possibility of the brain learning physical and strange sensations, and that they could actually have an emotional basis. Schubiner also did an interview here with millions of views, and I think it's very insightful. Both of these are linked in the description below. Now, despite my reservations, I chose to participate on the panel because I thought my story might resonate with someone else, who then starts exploring the mind-body world that all began with this concept of the mind-body syndrome, or TMS, from John Sarno, and now has several spin-offs, particularly in a scientific direction, and there are even clinical trials now that show this approach as effective for non-structural chronic pain and long COVID without organ damage. I think these studies are relevant for protracted withdrawal. And before I kind of go into that further, I'll just kind of repeat what I said on the panel, that TMS is a non-pathologizing term. It's not about disease or illness, but it's opposite. It's getting away from this concept of disease, of something being wrong with somebody, whether it's mental illness or even protracted withdrawal syndrome. And I think that's a really crucial thing that makes this approach different, especially from the biomedical model of protracted withdrawal syndrome. And I'd actually like to talk first about this biomedical model, and then I'll go into this mind-body model of protracted withdrawal sensations. The biomedical drug sickness model of protracted withdrawal, which is what's found all over the internet and in some academic literature as well, usually written by psychiatrists. And this model basically states that psychiatric drugs induce a unique neurobiological injury that causes symptoms that can last for months or years. And it's claimed that the only healer is time itself. And this seems to be applied universally to everyone in withdrawal or thought to experience withdrawal. And people are told this, and so this is just what people tend to believe. Now, this very well may be the situation, probably is, for people in acute withdrawal, or perhaps with specific iatrogenic injuries, or anyone else who says that time has healed them. I would never dispute someone else's experience. But this approach doesn't work for everybody, right? It wasn't working for me. Too much time had gone by. I've been experiencing these sensations for like 5 years, so I needed something else, So for those of us who are just kind of waiting around and suffering, that's kind of the only approach within this biomedical model. It's just waiting around, right? That's it. So if you're interested in considering something else, I can now talk about an emerging mind-body model and the one that helped me to resolve 5 years of protracted withdrawal sensations and chronic pain. A mind-body model of protracted withdrawal proposes that, yes, we've been injured by psychiatric drugs, but that we've sufficiently healed by now to feel healthy again, even if we presently feel terrible or beyond terrible. And this is because the reason withdrawal sensations can continue is that they become a learned phenomena by the brain, usually due to just an overwhelming amount of stress. And I can expand on that by using a working mind-body model of pain and adapt that to protracted withdrawal. So according to this model, acute withdrawal sets off a danger alarm signal in the brain, and then brain pathways form to process the withdrawal reaction, what we should feel, how intense, and what can happen is even after this drug injury sufficiently heals, these brain pathways processing the withdrawal sensations, they can remain behind. They can remain active. And what seems to keep this processing going is if the brain's alarm system stays on, if there's some ongoing threat. So if a person's really stressed out or upset about something, this danger alarm signal keeps going and it feeds into this withdrawal brain processing. When this happens again and again, they can get wired together and the brain can basically learn to produce withdrawal on its own due to ongoing stress. Then it becomes protracted withdrawal. I think there are a few ways that explain what keeps this danger signal going and causes these withdrawal sensations to persist. I think the first way that this alarm keeps going is a sense of physical danger. I mean, I was totally preoccupied with these sensations because I thought, I was probably brain damaged. So all these sensations were just the first thing I thought about when I woke up in the morning, the last thing I thought about when I went to bed. I'd scan for them constantly. I'd research them on forums, and all of my fear sent a message to my mind that something really important and scary was going on, that I was damaged. And it reinforced this danger alarm signal that was processing these sensations. And what ultimately happened is my stress response got wired together with these withdrawal sensations. So I'd have stress, then I'd feel withdrawal. Or I'd feel withdrawal, then all of a sudden I'd just be, freaking out. It was this vicious cycle. But oftentimes I get these waves that came out of nowhere. And I thought, okay, how is this possible? So I think the second thing that kept this danger signal going was a sense of emotional danger from deeper emotions. And there's now this fascinating neuroscientific research that shows that as pain or perhaps other unwanted sensations, as they become chronic, the active areas of the brain shift away from acute injury processing and it goes toward emotional processing. So in a way, persistent pain is actually an emotional injury, or it becomes an emotional injury. Now, this is not at all the same as mental illness. I think we need to get away from this idea that emotions equal illness. There is nothing wrong with having emotions. I think the relevant idea here is that beneath conscious awareness, beneath all these horrible, often physical sensations like what I felt, there was deeper emotional processing taking place outside my awareness that kept them going. Now, I think part of this just came from my fear of my ongoing situation, but it appears to be more than just that, because there's now this connection between mysterious syndromes that go on in trauma. And I think my own trauma, especially from childhood, kind of sensitized this alarm system, this danger alarm system, to go off more easily. And when this alarm went off again in withdrawal, and when I had all this stress in my life around the time of withdrawal, this triggered old emotions about feeling unsafe in my life. And it's my history of feeling unsafe that helped keep this danger alarm system activated. I also think my immense fear and just really, really intense rage towards psychiatry also contributed to my sense of emotional danger. I was just so angry. So, to be clear, this isn't a medicalizing concept like PTSD. John Sarno had a non-pathologizing concept, as I said earlier, the mind-body syndrome, or TMS, which says that emotional stress can induce or maintain physical syndromes, and there's now lots of evidence showing that this is real brain processing. So this is not all in one's head, and that's obvious to anyone who's ever experienced this. Now, the way to resolve this is to work toward feeling physically safe again, feeling emotionally safe again. This can help calm down this danger signal. And you don't have to feel safe right away. It's a process. But through this process, you can, as I said, get this danger signal to calm down. And when that happens, these sensations can actually go away. So time is not the healer in this case. It's understanding that's the healer. So if time is involved at all, it's the time needed to deeply understand and integrate these mind-body concepts, how they apply to us, in making this personal sort of mind-body connection. And it's that can actually have these sensations resolve. And there are several clinical trials now, successful clinical trials for chronic pain and long COVID that show how this is actually possible. So let's take a look at those now. The first clinical trial I want to look at is on pain reprocessing therapy, or PRT, which basically took a mind-body educational approach and delivered it as one-on-one psychotherapy, which is not always necessary, but that's just the way this study did it, and that's the way this PRT stuff is usually delivered. Now, the participants in this study had non-structural pain, which is the vast majority of chronic pain, and really emphasized that feeling physically safe again is kind of at the heart of getting these sensations to go away. And so this was kind of accomplished by the participants kind of coming to the realization that there's nothing fundamentally wrong with them. That this pain's not coming from an injury or from nervous system damage, but a learned brain state driven by fear and preoccupation with the pain. And what this means is that the pain can actually be unlearned by reframing one's relationship to it. So one major tool used in this sort of pain reprocessing therapy is something called somatic tracking, which is basically being with the pain and actively reprocessing it as simply learned sensations, turning on due to a danger alarm signal. They then investigate why this alarm has gone off for themselves, and they can start to view the pain through a lens of safety. And when they do this and some more, the pain can actually go away. And that's what usually happened by the end of this trial. About 2/3 of participants essentially resolved the pain they experienced. It's a landmark study. I can link to more in the description below, and it has the best results for chronic pain in any clinical trial, except for the one I'm about to talk about. But yeah, if you want to find out more about pain reprocessing therapy in that study I mentioned, you can check it out in a link below. Now, the other study I want to talk about is a Harvard pilot clinical trial on psychophysiologic symptom relief therapy, PSRT, which has not gotten the same publicity. Now, this trial actually used Sarno's work directly, reading one of his books, also reading a Howard Schubiner book, and almost 75% of people finished the study pain-free or almost pain-free, compared to 18% in the usual care group. So, the difference is absolutely massive. And this approach also focused on feeling physically safe, but emphasized a bit more, or perhaps a lot more, on feeling emotionally safe. And so they looked at the role of trauma, of repressed emotions, and personality traits as the main factor causing this danger signal, i.e. this pain, to persist. And the techniques employed here were related to that. So it was related to like emotional expression. So the participants did journaling, and stress reduction. So the participants did things like meditation and affirmations. But ultimately, the aim here was learning to connect stressors and powerful emotions to the sensations themselves. And by learning that they were now emotionally safe, despite all that's happened to them in their life, it doesn't have to be some big trauma, but learning that you're emotionally safe, and that the fact that we might not feel safe can have profound implications on the nervous system, on our bodies. When they realized this, when they made this connection, when they learned to reprocess what happened to them, again, 75% of them saw the pain essentially go away. And this is the largest number ever, I think, for a pain trial. And it's just a massive thing that's happening here. And I'll link this study and its protocol as well in the description below. And I guess while I'm at it, I'll just add one more thing. I'll just mention a Harvard study on psychophysiologic symptom relief therapy for long COVID. These participants didn't have organ damage, but they did have COVID, and they had long COVID afterwards. And they saw significant benefits across the board using this psychophysiologic symptom relief therapy. And there's even several YouTube channels now dedicated to resolving long COVID using this or a very similar manner. And there's now lots of related research and anecdotal evidence and success stories that this sort of mind-body approach can work for chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, IBS, various skin problems, and more. And this is all kind of easily found on the internet when searching them in connection to the mind-body syndrome. So protracted withdrawal sensations like chronic pain and all these other sort of mind-body phenomena, they all feature kind of a weird catalog of neurological things going on that are unexplainable by traditional biomedical perspectives. And there's a lot of symptom overlap between protracted withdrawal and chronic pain and long COVID and so on. And like people in protracted withdrawal or experiencing what we think might be protracted withdrawal, all the people in these studies I listed, they all believe that they're damaged, right? People who were in car accidents, who believe they broke their bodies and have MRIs suggesting just that. Or that they have the COVID virus, right? And that this had damaged them. And of course, there are us people who are in protracted withdrawal who believe that the drugs have damaged us. Now, this idea of kind of long-term damage or injury is so important in maintaining this syndrome. It's by actually stopping believing that we're damaged or that, time is the healer. And again, this is for people who it resonates with, that we can begin to reprocess the experience that we've had and acknowledge the emotional aspects of what's happening. And we can begin to resolve these protracted withdrawal sensations through the acquisition of this new knowledge. I'd also just say that those of us who develop protracted withdrawal probably had other medically unexplainable stuff going on previously in our lives as well. I mean, I certainly did. Also, the people who tend to develop this mind-body phenomena tend to be people who are hard on themselves, really hard on themselves, perhaps compassionate, really driven people, perhaps people pleasers. And this can sometimes result in kind of negative stress. That's another common element between all of these things. Sometimes mind-body approaches are conflated as if they're all the same thing or all have the same efficacy or whatever. But this is like saying that all physical approaches are the same, as if physical therapy is the same as chiropractic or osteopathy. I mean, yes, they're all physical, but they're all obviously very different and yield different results. So there are also different mind-body approaches, whether it's CBT or meditation, and a Sarno-inspired approach is also very different, not only in its techniques, but also in its superior efficacy for pain and other mind-body phenomena. For instance, the psychophysiologic symptom relief therapy study for chronic pain also included a mindfulness-based stress reduction component. So one group just got this mindfulness program, and the other group got the mindfulness program plus a Sarno-based education. So what were those results? Well, for those who only got the mindfulness program, 25% of them were pain-free by the end of the study. But those who got the mindfulness program and the Sarno-based mind-body knowledge, 75% of them were pain-free or mostly pain-free. So that's like a 50% difference. So it's absolutely massive, right? So while mindfulness can be very useful, and it's likely to be what people in withdrawal gravitate towards because of its popularity, there's actually far more powerful techniques out there. So all these sort of mind-body approaches are clearly not the same, not even close. In fact, it can be the difference between someone just kind of managing protracted withdrawal sensations to actually resolving them. Unfortunately, people with protracted withdrawal sensations are generally not doing this sort of thing. In fact, if you even mention this stuff, you can get attacked or banned, from certain withdrawal groups. So this is not a popular approach, but this is something that's coming up. It's coming along, and if you're interested in it, what do you got to lose? So what does this all mean, right? Well, it means that time is not necessarily the healer. Some people will basically heal themselves with their own mindset, and others, like myself, may benefit from an education-based mind-body approach. And in that case or that situation, the only time needed is the time required to understand and integrate this approach into our lives. So that's the healer. It's understanding. And it takes work to deepen one's understanding, but it can be done. And there, of course, will be those who, are kind of offended by this idea and they criticize it in the usual ways. And that's okay, because some people will actually dig into these TMS materials and find the resolution that they're seeking. And for those interested in exploring the mind-body syndrome and exploring kind of the spin-offs of it, this is something that can be done for free. You can probably find books at your local library, or you can download books, or there's lots of YouTube videos and podcasts and so on. I also have a resource page, and you can also feel free to reach out, if you have any comments or questions or having trouble finding resources. And so, I just wish you the absolute best, and, whatever it is, I hope you find the best path for yourself.